Oh hey, you found me. That's impressive considering how long it's been. Anyway, welcome to my chamber. Take a seat. So I know there's this thing called calendar, but it's showing some nonsense about it being almost June, so we're not gonna dwell on that. Here's what I read in the first quarter of 2026 and what I thought about that. Yep, I started working on this video a while ago. It's mid-July now, and here's what I read in the first half of 2026. Let's go. In total, I read 22 books. 4 of them were in audio, and there were 3 DNFs. In chronological order, the first that I finished was an audiobook, The House of My Mother by Sherry Franken. If you have heard of 8 Passengers, you know what this is about. In short, Ruby Franke gave birth to 6 people and still made sure no one would want to visit her in prison. If you notice a difference in sound, that's because my Type-C port has been acting out, and before I have it fixed, I'll have to switch to my mini jack connected microphone, so sorry about that. So the book is basically Sherry's tell-all story covering her entire life, which is admittedly not very long since she's still quite young, and her mother's path from an emotionally abusive wannabe trad wife to a cult member. I don't usually rate non-fiction, especially memoirs, so I'll just say I rather enjoyed this one. Stars out of 5. Sherry did use what she calls a writing collaborator, which I have no problem with, and she herself seems rather articulate, so as a text the book is well written and well paced, but it also reads pretty young, which makes sense because she was only about 21 or 22 when the book came out, although I can't let go of the fact that she called Tolkien's One Ring neutral and only bad if used for bad purposes. No, Sherry, the One Ring is evil. You know who else is evil? Your mom, sorry. Let's move on. But when I say I enjoyed it, I don't mean it was a fun read. Sherry starts the narration at the moment when she learns her mother was arrested, but still doesn't know if her siblings are okay, so it's a pretty emotional moment, and if you're sensitive to mentions of child abuse, which I guess most of us are, it can get to you. I was also listening to it in audio, and it's narrated by the author, which only made it hit harder. I'm sensing a certain screw you mom sentiment in the entire thing, but to be fair, Sherry shows some empathy to her mother, particularly when talking about her miscarriage and about how Ruby's upbringing basically groomed her into a person obsessed with succeeding as a wife and a mother instead of, well, being a good wife and mother. If Sherry's right about her mom being a narcissist, I don't know if there was an upbringing that could have yielded totally different results, but the one she got probably didn't help. I agree with the assessments that this book would have been better if more time had passed after this entire thing unfolding, but I can imagine Sherry wanting to take it all out of her system and leave it behind her. In particular, she goes very easy on her father, Kevin Franke, who completely checked out of his supposed role as a father and protector. However, even her testament makes it clear he partially enabled her mother's abuse and then folded completely when Jodie Hildebrand came into the picture, so that's a man of the house for you, I guess. Still, facing the fact that your less horrible parent is still pretty meh is a tough task, and Sherry is still very young. She also seems to have stayed in the Mormon church, so if you're hoping for her denouncing the church, that doesn't happen in this one. She talks about how the church basically let her groomer get away with grooming her, but also mentions that it was the church that covered her therapy, so there's that. This is a useful peep behind the scenes of family vlogs, in case anyone still had illusions about those, and a story of growing up with a narcissistic mother, which I feel can be downplayed because emotional abuse, unlike physical one, doesn't leave scars, but it's still harmful and unfortunately something many people can relate to, so I can easily recommend this one. The second one I finished was also an audiobook, With a Vengeance by Riley Sager. So I spent almost 3 first months of 2026 in Chisinau because, you know, Rush is somehow still a thing. And I'm pretty sure I picked this one because I thought it would be fun to listen to an audiobook about a train while on a train. I don't really like traveling by trains, despite Ukrainian Railways' best efforts. I get seasick and don't like the smells that accompany the entire experience, so getting transferred into a much more posh train seemed like a good idea. Yeah, I only managed to listen to the first few chapters while on the road, so I can't say it helped much. It's the 1950s in Philadelphia, and Anna Matheson is about to finally get her revenge on the people who ruined her family's reputation and fortune during World War II. You see, her dad owned a train company in Philadelphia, and his main pride and joy was a luxury Philadelphia Phoenix train. But in 1942, a train Matheson's company produced and provided for the American troops exploded, killing over 30 people, including Anna's brother. Her father got blamed and was killed in prison. Her mother unsubscribed from this sad existence, and young Anna went to live with her unnecessarily dramatic aunt. And now, 12 years later, she is ready to have her revenge. Now, get this. Someone, we don't know who, for a long time, provides Anna's aunt with evidence that her brother, Anna's father, was framed and there were 6 people involved. The aunt dies but makes sure Anna gets the evidence, and she also sends another victim's brother Seamus her way. And her last wish is make them pay. So what does our smartass Anna do? This is not a spoiler, this is how the book begins. She lures all 6 people on board of Philadelphia Phoenix for a ride to Chicago that'll take a whole night. 5 of them show up. She confronts them with nothing but a bulky man with a gun by her side, makes it clear that they are screwed, and then proceeds to travel in a closed space with 5 people who have nothing to lose because she's just that smart. Of course they start to die. I was immediately robbed of any grace I could give this book because it starts with an incredibly stupid plan. She could go to the police and newspapers right away, make a huge show of it in Philadelphia where her family and everyone who was affected in the story lived. She could get vindicated immediately. But no, she had to create a spiders in a can scenario and then have a surprised Pikachu face when people who clearly have no allegiance to each other get aggressive. So I could only care this much for whatever happens afterwards. And then there's this incredible annoying writing style. Like I said, this is set in the 1950s, so there's this attempt at old school chic. Anna is a blonde woman in a red dress. There is at least one revolver involved. They kept saying things like, it was a long time ago. It all feels very noir-ish, but somehow also really hard to take seriously. Like in the show Castle, there was this episode, The Blue Butterfly, set in the 1940s. And it's a bit goofy, you're not supposed to take it all at face value. And this was the feeling that I was getting here, and I don't think this was the plan. Add to it the incredibly repetitive writing, where you're reminded every 5 minutes that Anna really, really hates these folks, but she doesn't want any of them dead. It was so eye-roll inducing. I hate it when authors do that, and I've been noticing it more and more recently. Also, I have a problem with how the book ends. I mean, there's an incredibly cringy dialogue where all the family drama gets repeated for us in case we weren't paying attention, but the way the murder mystery gets resolved, mild spoiler ahead, hits the time code. It's given, if you seek revenge against someone who literally killed your loved one, you're just as bad as them. And no, let's just say I'm not advocating for blood vendetta. I just don't really like it when people who are completely justified in their anger are made to be the antagonists. And there is this message going through the entire book that it took me a while to understand why it bothers me so much. Oh, Anna, you spent so much time and effort to get revenge, and you could have done something better for yourself instead. Yeah, she could have had this terrible and unjust thing not being done to her. She's not wrong for wanting justice and closure, she's just dumb about it, not the same thing. To be fair, Sager keeps it sympathetic and it's not too obnoxious, but I still wished it all had ended a bit differently. And Anna, instead of being told, why would you make this all so much more complicated than it needed to be, please go home, find a job, is told, you are so smart for getting several of our suspects killed after wasting all your money on this mess. You are such a genius, come work for FBI. 2.5 stars, and that only because I liked a couple of characters. Dante was fun. He seemed to know his in a goofy cringe noir set and acted accordingly. Next one was an arc, No Man's Land by Richard K. Morgan. This one I read thanks to NetGalley before it came out in March, and boy oh boy, what an interesting concept. I just paused to get some water and I spilled the water on my microphone, so if this one also starts acting out, you know why. Again, sorry. So the main character, Duncan Silver, is the First World War, or as known at the time, the Great War veteran, and he lives in England that is now very unfortunately partially overrun by Fae and the Fae-infested forest. And these are not your noble Tolkien elves, or even your holly black mischievous fairies. These guys are capital E evil and occasionally gross. I was still reading Heartland's Science of Fairy Tales, and I was just going through the chapter about changelings and other fairy shenanigans as I was reading this book, so I would say that the whole changeling thing feels rather well researched. Because yeah, the Fae in this one do kidnap children and replace them with changelings as is their wont. Luckily, Duncan here has a set of skills that make him a very useful man for such times, particularly for going into the forest and retrieving stolen kids and staying alive in the process. He's also very personally motivated because he hates those folklore bastards. Why? Well, wouldn't you like to know? The story starts with another job to return an abducted child, and of course it doesn't go as expected. And now Duncan has to uncover a conspiracy while also, you guessed it, grappling with his own past. I was immediately taken by how distinct and descriptive the writing was. It basically takes you in there into a rather depressive interbellum. I want to say Scotland, but I'm not sure if it's Scotland or England. Let's just say British Isles. The main character is a Scotsman, that's for sure. You can feel the texture of this world, something like Peaky Blinders, but with hoodoo. Hoodoo is one of the names for the hidden folk that is used here, for those who don't know. I didn't. The text smells of old forest and rotten leaves and moss and gunpowder and iron and rust and grain. And I love the premise. There's something about the post-Great War mindset of everything we knew is now put into question. We are traumatized for life. Nothing makes sense anymore. It marries rather well with having your entire existence overturned by an old and not very friendly magical race. For all my love for Tolkien, I'm always down for mean fairies. Give me all the mean, pointy-eared, iron-allergic bastards. But that being said, I'm aware, and I feel like it's worth mentioning, that the beliefs about changelings were a real thing, and I imagine they caused some real harm to children. It doesn't mean that this concept can't be used. I, for one, find it very compelling. It's just something to bring up, in my opinion. The main character is not super original with all his growling and swearing, but he's compelling. His backstory is heartbreaking, and there is some familiarity about him because we've seen this archetype before, and I don't mind it. What I do mind, though, is this insistence that some male authors have to write their male protagonist as a complete, consistent, and relentless hit with the ladies. Every girl in the area, from a middle-aged witch to a literal tree spirit, wants herself a bit of that. And hey, the women do it too. We all know this archetype of a female protagonist whom everyone around her inexplicably fancies, so I'm not saying the male authors can't have this little harmless fantasy, but it's so blatant here. There's a plotline in this book that literally could be taken out of it, and with some editing nothing would have changed, and the only reason it is here is so that Duncan could save the damsel from distress. That girl is just pure male fantasy, by the way. She finds out she's terminally ill, and her reaction to it is to immediately get busy. With the main character, of course. It was so obnoxious, it was taking me out of the story. Like, can you rein it in, Duncan? There's people that are dying. It's especially upsetting because while Duncan is uniting human women, fairies, witches in their universal affection for him, the very interesting building blocks of this story remain very much underutilized. I've mentioned his backstory, but we never really know how it gets resolved. The entire political conflict gets only partially resolved, and that thanks to an influential friend. And then there's this finale that, well, I mean, it could be worse, but it's rather underwhelming. Duncan makes a whole bunch of very rash, hot-headed decisions. Other people get hurt because of that. It's often hinted that he's irreversibly damaged by his past, but that storyline feels rather unfinished. The politics of the situation seem grand and complex, but Morgan doesn't really do much with them, so that's a particular flavor of disappointment when there's so much good stuff to cook with, but it's just kind of there, unused. So check it out if you're into evil fairies, but I warned you. The next one is a Ukrainian book. It's a collection of short stories called Bizarre Heart or Whimsical Heart. I constantly hesitate between these two. It's by a Ukrainian writer, Darina Makohon, known as Irina Vilde, and it was published in Lviv in 1936. At the time, Lviv was controlled by the Second Polish Republic, which was not all peaches for the local Ukrainian population, but still there was no mass crackdown like the one in the Soviet-controlled part of Ukraine in the 1930s. I don't think Vilde would have survived the executed Renaissance had she lived, say, in Kyiv or Kharkiv. Remarkably, though, even after the west of Ukraine was taken over by the USSR, she not only survived, she was the head of the Lviv chapter of the Writers' Union at some point, and a member of the Ukrainian Soviet Parliament, all while writing in Ukrainian, having been accused of nationalism and not showing, at least from what I can see based on this one collection, a level of ideological and class purity expected of artists at the time. That's not to say that the short stories are some political or social statements. In fact, they are rather romantic and psychological. Maybe that actually saved Vilde when the Soviets came, because people tend to underestimate women who write about feelings. Bizarre Heart is the title of one of the stories, but it's also fitting for the collection since all of them are more or less about the whims and quirks of the human heart. There's one story about a seemingly perfect couple that might just be separated forever because he didn't cheat, but there was a moment when it looked like he did, and now he knows that she could suspect him of cheating even though there was no proof, and this knowledge might just be enough to ruin everything. Some of the stories are in first person and they are written like letters. My favorite one is called Theft, and I wish so badly that it was translated because it's so good. I read it ages ago somewhere, kind of forgot who the author was, and was delighted to see it here. Basically, a man and a woman have a conversation about reputation and how easily a woman's reputation can be destroyed by a man basically saying something about her personal life offhandedly with no proof. And it doesn't quite work the other way around, because nobody cares about a man's private life as long as his public or professional image is immaculate, and you can't really ruin someone's public persona with no evidence. And the woman basically proves without much sweat that it can be done. It's short, sweet, smart, satisfying. If I wasn't afraid that the Hola publisher, who seems to have the rights to Vilde's work now, would be on my case for copyright infringement, I'd translate it into English. Vilde was only 29 when this book came out, and it feels very youthful, but more in a nostalgic way than juvenile. It's quite moving at times and very sincere. It's not translated into English, so basically I was just gloating this entire time. To be serious though, I think it's important to talk about Ukrainian authors that are not translated, so at least you know you're missing out. Okay, the next one was quite divisive. It's Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy. This one has made some waves, hasn't it? You've probably heard about it, but in case you've just crawled from under a rock to enjoy the summer, Jeanette McCurdy, yes, the one from the ruined childhood's factory known as Nickelodeon, released her debut novel, and it's about a 17-year-old high schooler Waldo getting entangled with her English teacher. Yeah, I know, it's gross as hell. I've seen people praising this book for how blunt and brutally honest it is, and I've seen people criticizing it for not handling the sensitive topic well. I, for one, enjoyed this book's clipped, intentionally edgy writing and the dry humor, but I also have my notes. But first of all, if you are from the camp of people who think that this book in any way excuses Mr. Corgi's actions, yes, his name is Mr. Corgi, I know, we all know. I don't know what to tell you. Try reading it again with a bit more critical thinking this time. I had a short about it, I don't want to repeat myself, but he very clearly crossed quite a few boundaries and then failed to enforce them. Also, he's such a loser. Oh my god, when you read about him in your 30s, it's just from his way of justifying himself to his writing aspirations. When you know where to look, he's such a tool. I respect that McCurdy didn't make Waldo a perfect victim. She's almost aggressively proactive. She's also judgmental and impulsive. It feels like she struggles to believe anyone could genuinely like her. So of course, when an English teacher with some obvious Timur tortured poet vibes shows up, she thinks she found her soulmate. You're not his soulmate, babe. You're just a part of his midlife crisis. McCurdy also throws in a good chunk of commentary on consumerism and draws a not-so-subtle parallel between Waldo's craving for validation from an older man and her compulsive buying habits and probably an eating disorder. I'm like 90% sure she'd be making better life decisions if she only had a vegetable once in a while. I did think that the explicit scenes were too much. Like that one scene with the period blood. I see its purpose for the narrative as this like rock bottom point that makes Waldo realize where she is in life, but by God, it was so extra. It was completely unnecessary. Also, since Waldo's age had almost no impact on the story, I don't see why she could at least be 18. It would still be gross and inappropriate, but at least not messing with minors level inappropriate. I wish also there was more interaction between the main character and older women. I loved that one scene where she talks to a customer. It's a lady in her 40s or 50s, and she asks Waldo if she knows her worth. I thought that scene lays out the main problem in this book very well. I actually wanted a confrontation between her and Corgi's wife because she looked like someone Waldo would aspire to be. Her own mother only has wisdom to share about how to entertain a man, which is super ironic considering her mother can't keep a normal relationship to save her life. I felt like Waldo's relationships with other women, her mom, her teacher's wife, her best friend, could add more layers to the story because in the end it kind of fizzled out. I didn't hate the ending. I thought it was a nice, if messed up, coming of age moment, but it could have been better if Waldo had some introspection about what she's been through. It's realistic that it takes time to process something like that, but well, realism doesn't always work for a story. Corgi is, by the way, an incredibly realistic character. I loved how he was characterized by his surface level infatuation with culture, quote unquote, his lack of discipline when it comes to writing, that he tries to intellectualize, his woe is me attitude. Like, you've probably met people like that. He feels familiar. I hate this guy. I hope he died of a broken heart off screen or something. I gotta say, while I'm not going to die on a hill of this book being perfect, because it's not, some of the criticism about it that I've heard felt like it was aimed at how Jeanette McCurdy handled her own trauma, and I don't think I like that. There is some responsibility tied to handling topics like this, but I don't think I agree that there is only one right way to write about them and all other ways are by default exploitative or harmful. But if you were thinking about picking it up, consider the content warnings and keep in mind this book kind of trusts you to already know that teachers sleeping with their students is bad. And there's of course that one scene. Next, I listened to What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I can attest that it is indeed a retelling of the fall of the House of Usher. If you were in doubt. Alex Easton, a sworn soldier, pronounced Kakan, from a country of Galicia, which is somewhere in Europe, arrives at a very misty and unsettling estate of Khan friends Madeline and Roderick Usher in a place called Ruravia. Upon arrival, Kai meets an English mycologist, Eugenia Potter, who mentions her niece Beatrix, who is a skilled illustrator. So I deduce Beatrix Potter is a real person in this world, but Edgar Allan Poe is probably not, because if he is and you show up in a moldering, crumbling house of your friends named Ushers and the sister is clearly unwell and you don't leave immediately, whatever befalls you next is on you, buddy. The plot does more or less follow the structure of the original story with some very disturbing twists like zombie rabbits and something else that I won't name, as it basically gives away the entire plot. It's also a little more specific about the entire impending doom of it all, so that's a plus. There are also some lovable side characters like the aforementioned Eugenia and Alex's Batman Angus. Of course, there's Kingfisher's signature humor and witty observations. The way she writes clicks with me so much that I'm actually over here listening to horror, which is not my genre at all. That being said, I can't say too much else about this story. Partially because it's so short, it was about 4.5 hours in audio, but also because we've heard the story before, haven't we? There is an underlying theme of being in denial of reality because it's too scary to comprehend, but as a result, we get a not so proactive protagonist, so maybe it's for the better that it's so short. But anyway, it's perfect for a misty autumn or winter day if you're in the mood to be a little spooked. The next book I read was Snake Agent by Liz Williams. Alright, I will try to explain what this is about, but if you don't get it, don't worry, I'm pretty sure I didn't either. So the book is set in the future, but it was written in 2005, so it provides a far more interesting version of what the future could look like than whatever it is we're dealing with 20 years later. The place is Singapore 3 on Earth, which alludes on other Singapores, not on Earth, and our hero is Inspector Chen, whose line of work is dealing with whatever the local version of the underworld is supposed to be. Seriously, I might just be too Muslim for stories set in hell. They always feel like someone is just trying to be quirky about their social commentary. Here it is basically a lot of bureaucracy with a pinch of body horror. So Chen is investigating a possible post-mortem human soul trafficking scheme, and in his work he crosses paths with an underworld colleague of sorts, a very charming and decisively trickstery demon named Zhuirsh, who has his own task, and from them on the book pays much more attention to the budding bromance and Chen's marital problems than to the investigation at hand, and I'm not really mad about that because I love a good body story, but gun to my head, I don't think I could explain what the initial scheme was about. Young girls got hurt because young girls cannot catch a break, that's for sure. I've developed a certain respect for the books written before TikTok and tropes and all this modern online book discourse because there is something about their language that says the author really wasn't thinking about whether or not quotes would look good in a short video. That is to say, I like the writing, I'm not passing any judgment on whether or not Liz Williams represented Asian cultures well, but I didn't find any major complaints about that. That being said though, the plot itself didn't do it for me even before everything got resolved by a supernatural intervention. I did like Zhuirsh's character, and it was cool to have a middle-aged protagonist who's just trying to get through his work week and keep his marriage, but other than that, I can't say I was much compelled to go forth with the series because yes, it is a series, so 3 stars from me, thank you. Will not be coming back. Moving on. Next one, I listened to Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. You've heard it before. The sun is dying. Our hero needs to find out why, with sprinkles of amnesia. Wow. What to say about this book but that I loved it, except for the part when I hated it. Spoilers ahead, kindly do consult the time codes. I don't want to basically repeat everything I said on my Substack about all the Russia glazing, but in short, it's probably a good thing Ryland Grace is never coming back to Earth because he'd be so upset by his favorite country making up for his skipped history lessons by showing its face all over again for those far in the back.
But a first confirmation, some civilians survived the bombing of a theatre in Mariupol. Eyewitnesses say at least 300 people lost their lives. It's not clear how many more may still be buried here.
Generally, this book has some near delusional faith in humanity that I don't find contagious. You know, sometimes you see hopefulness and optimism that you don't exactly share, but they kind of inspire you. This is not one of those books. I was a little bit rolling my eyes at all the humanity is awesome stuff because no, it's not Ryland, and you better tell your friend that before he sends his compatriots to get dissected in Area 51, okay? And I get it, we need to believe in the better version of ourselves to become better, but this feels like wishful thinking at this point, which is not helpful. Spoilers probably over. Sorry. get carried away. Besides that, though, great book. Very well written, very engaging. The audio narration was spectacular. The main character is lovable despite everything I've said before, and I love a good romance. And this is at its core a story of a beautiful friendship. I do owe it to Willow from Willow Talks Books, who advised to go into the book without watching the movie trailer and basically as blind as possible. This resulted in me making probably very funny faces at the audiobook at certain moments. I don't think there's anyone left on earth who's interested in this book and doesn't know the big reveal yet, but in case you are that person, do yourself a favor and read the book before engaging with any content about it or the adaptation. I promise it's a lot of fun, minus fanboying over a terrorist state, but otherwise, yeah, much fun. The next book I finished was in Ukrainian, but it is translated into English, and it's Transitional Culture and Post-Colonial Trauma by Tamara Hundurova. You know those books that are clearly meant for someone with an education you probably don't have? Yeah, this might have been one of those. Now, it's not like I didn't get it, but it did keep me on my toes. Hundurova follows Ukrainian cultural process in the 19th and 2000s with some flashbacks into Imperial Russia, the Austrian period in the western regions of Ukraine, the Chernobyl impact, etc., singling out a few works and authors that capture, depict, and process the trauma of being occupied, dealing with post-colonial phantom pains, processing the nuclear catastrophe that this nation didn't even have full agency over but had to face the consequences nevertheless. The book doesn't only include literature, but it features some of the probably most important Ukrainian authors of the period, like Yuri Andrukhovich and Serhiy Zhadan, Oksana Zabushko. There's also a chapter where she mentions Mykola Gogol and his, using her words, colonial stylization of Ukraine, which in my opinion is very important considering that Gogol seems to still be internationally seen as a Russian author. The language gets a little heavy, there's quite a lot of psychology and philosophy involved, as well as obviously history and literary theory. Nevertheless, to me, it was a guideline of sorts to the books that I haven't yet read and an interesting context for those that I have. So it was definitely useful for me, and I'm really glad that this book is translated into English, because even if works of fiction get translated from Ukrainian without knowing the Ukrainian context, I feel like foreign readers might struggle to get their full weight. I'll actually go as far as put a link to it below just in case it's in your niche interests. I wouldn't say it's a must read and I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, but if you're serious about exploring and understanding modern Ukrainian literature, but also if you're interested in exploring post-colonial processing outside of the more common west towards south and east lands, I think this is a good pick. Next was The Rebel and the Rose by Catherine Doyle. I was in the downtown of Chisinau, and it's a small precious city, but it was the end of a weekday and I made a strategic mistake taking a cab from the spot where it took like half an hour to just turn toward my home, so I thought I'd start a new audiobook, and then it struck me that the sequel of the City of Phantom series had been out for a while and I still hadn't done my part to make sure Freddie Carter has a job, so I fixed that. Now, it's a sequel, so everything I say next can arguably be considered a spoiler to The Dagger in the Flame, but I'll keep it vague. Our main lovebirds are separated, Seraphine is making her liquid light potions, Ransom is killing people for money, the usual. But lo, the king needs favors and the plot needs to happen, so they're going on a quest together. Them and some side characters. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a blatant young adult, and I'm pretty sure it counts as romantasy. It's more or less painted by the numbers, dagger to throat or shade to throat, who did this to you type of deal, but it's fun, even when the characters are exasperatedly juvenile because, well, they're in their late teens. Even when you know some topics will be avoided solely to prolong some unnecessary tension, it's fun. These kids are idiots. It's adorable. I liked that the geography of the world expands, the politics get a little more complex, because in the first book it felt like two orders existed more or less in a vacuum. Still, Ransom's character felt a little uneven because in some scenes he's your regular traumatized angsty teenager, and in others he acts like, I can't say it, well, a dusky parental figure, okay, with anger issues. There were a couple of very annoying scenes where Seraphine is losing control over her powers, as is her duty, as a self-respecting fantasy heroine, and he goes, Seraphine, breathe. She's not giving birth, dude. Back off. I didn't love a moment where he physically removes her from the room to cool down after an argument with someone that she didn't even start. Then again, it's all an appropriate amount of cringe that I've basically done to myself by reading books I might be too old for, but I'm fairly certain I'd have been annoyed by it as a teenager as well. Still, that was all within acceptable limits. What I did have a problem with was that these characters are supposed to be more or less street smart, and they got incredibly dumb when the plot needed them not to figure something out. It was aggravating, like you just saw a guy basically mind controlling someone into doing something they don't want to do. You just saw it with your two eyeballs. Why would you try to attack him when he can clearly see you? Why are you getting on my nerves? And before someone says, well, it's YA, stop thinking young adult readers are stupid, will you? So that was upsetting, but this book actually went places I didn't expect it to go. At some point I was thinking it wouldn't get that dark, and then it got that dark and a little darker even, so respect for that. I liked some new characters that got introduced. I really enjoyed the ending. Generally, I'd say this was better than the first part, and now I'm waiting to see if the third installment sticks the landing. I remember being so pissed when I realized the first one wasn't a standalone, and then it wasn't a duology, but you know what? The acceptance stage is going well. Bring it, Catherine Doyle. I'm ready. Next book I read was Frogkisser by Garth Nix. Yeah, I graduated from reading YA to middle grade. And I'll be honest with you, I mostly picked this one up because I was in this cute little indie bookshop in Chisinau, which I really like. I wanted to support them, and this one had a fun cover. It was mostly wishful thinking on my part. Frogkisser, with an exclamation mark, is about a 14-year-old princess Anya who has to go on a quest because she made a promise to her sister to turn her crush back from a frog into a prince. The sister got over it pretty quickly, but Anya here knows she's in a fairy tale and promises have weight, so off she goes to find ingredients for a magic kiss balm and also maybe probably overthrow her evil stepfather. And all of this is accompanied by annoying paparazzi-like heralds who dubbed her Frogkisser, with an exclamation mark. Now, this is a great book with that 2000s anachronistic fantasy vibe of Shrek, Ella Enchanted, The Knight's Tale, you know the type, but it really put to test my conviction that a good kid's book is suitable for every age, because while I had fun, I know I would have had way more of it had I read it at like 11, not at 14. At 14 I was too cool for a book about a princess. But I'm still glad I read this because first, it was engaging, with some classic fairy tale tropes used and subverted, with political commentary and enduring self-awareness, and second, because I think I like Garth Nix's style and I'm planning to look into more of his stuff. Also, what a cool name, Garth Nix, and it's actually his legal name. It's a no-brainer he became a fantasy author. The next one was another audiobook, Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, I'm sorry if I'm not. Okay, this one pissed me off. In fact, it pissed me off so badly I delayed talking about it, so please blame Miss Kubica for seeing this in July when this was supposed to be a first quarter wrap-up and come out in April. So, one day a woman in an idyllic suburbia goes missing. Then, sometime later, another woman, Meredith, vanishes together with her 6-year-old daughter. Skip 11 years and the daughter returns and the old questions resurface. Okay, first of all, the premise is misleading. Both women didn't vanish without a trace for 11 years. Their fate is pretty soon discovered. This is a dual timeline. Most of it takes place 11 years prior and is told in part through Meredith's POV. And I'm convinced this was done mostly so that the book could waste your time with red herrings, because there is no actual investigative work going on in either of the timelines. I know that a red herring is a genre's staple, but I'd assume it's still supposed to be relevant to the main mystery. Here we go from, ooh, it's a story about stalking, to, ooh, it's a story about medical misogyny, to, actually it was just a bunch of really unfortunate events happening in a chronological order and having close to no connection, and gravely exacerbated by women being stupid. Because yes, when women here are not painfully oblivious, they are being either hysterical or wildly unprofessional. And this is not the clever subversion one might think it is. Meredith was getting on my nerves because, first of all, I really hate it when women in fiction get threats and they tell no one. Because we know that in reality, a woman will shout from the roofs and be ignored until someone bad happens. Second, I'm sorry, but the girl has no spine. If some psycho jealous neighbor is accusing you of something you didn't do and you just stand there blinking, I'm immediately irritated. Like, girl, where's your rage? And third, she was so painfully dumb. Mild spoiler here, skip 20 seconds, but if you didn't know, the best time to tell someone you're about to turn them in for aggravated manslaughter is when you are alone and your young daughter is nearby. Just tell me you want to get killed at this point. Some plot lines just got abandoned once they were no longer serving the plot, so we never know how those conflicts were resolved. The writing was exhaustingly repetitive, like the author didn't think anyone could understand anything unless it's repeated twice. At the very least, a character would receive a threatening text message and go, "Oh my god, this unknown person wants me dead." Gee girl, I don't know how you've come to this conclusion based on this text where they say they want you dead, but I'm so glad you could spell it out for me. I was also listening to this one, and one of the just took pauses that made me think she didn't trust my ability to follow the story. So all in all, not a great experience. Was it engaging? Yes, to a degree, but at some point it was glaringly obvious where this was going, and the only reason you don't deduce it sooner is because it doesn't even go there for like half of the book. I was starting to think thriller just wasn't my genre, but fret not, there are some good ones down the line, we'll get there. Next, I finished Cold Kitchen, A Year of Culinary Journeys by Caroline Eden. This is a non-fiction book that could be a series of feature stories by a traveling foodie, Caroline Eden, who lives in Edinburgh, cooks in her cold basement kitchen, and thinks about her travels. Those cover Russia, the Baltics, Ukraine, Poland, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, and Armenia. Eden is very good at writing about food. Her language is descriptive and moderately poetic, and she makes you crave things you've never even seen or didn't know they existed. But this book is as much about politics as it is about recipes, so don't pick it up if you think food isn't political. Also, you're wrong if you think food isn't political. Everything is political. So how it works is we get glimpses of Caroline's life in her Edinburgh apartment, then we get a story about a specific country, then we get a recipe. And there are several such combinations for each season of the year. I particularly loved that Istanbul was in the winter chapter. The first time I went there it was in February, and I liked it much more than during summertime. Eden chooses very specific countries as her destinations. For example, Kyrgyzstan is known for its political volatility, and she just happens to be there for another uprising. In Russia, she boards a train and gets a bit of a geopolitical foreshadowing when a neighbor, a Russian military man, gets her and her partner drunk without taking no for an answer. In Riga and Warsaw, she visits places linked to the country's history, and well, in Ukrainian Lviv, she has her coffee in Svitkavy, which is a great place by the way, while there's a war raging on further east. And food for her is a pathway to the concept of home and its fragility that she describes very beautifully. Like in this quote, "Home is so thoroughly uncertain, so easily taken away. All it takes is the loss of a job, a divorce, an illness, a natural disaster, a war, a genocide." And in much the same way as the Armenians who were forced out of Ottoman Turkey lost their lives and their homes, Russia's bombardment of Ukraine has sent millions of Ukrainians fleeing theirs, just as countless Afghans, Syrians, and Palestinians did before them for so many years now. Families scattered in other towns and cities elsewhere, holding onto rusting keys, dreaming of return. On the other side though, I don't think anyone who speaks Russian proofread this, because some words Caroline uses don't quite mean what is implied. It's minor really, I noticed because I'm annoying, but one inaccuracy that really caught my eye was about the so-called Leninopad, that mass removal of Lenin monuments in Ukraine that according to this book started after 1991, when in fact only some in the western regions were removed back then. The Lenin in the heart of Kyiv, for example, stood there up until the Revolution of Dignity in 2013, when the Protestants decided it was overstaying its welcome. These are small details, but they really give away the level of understanding of this region's context. Then again, Eden, for all of her obvious empathy, mentions organized panels for Ukrainian and Russian authors for some reasons, so I guess she's a bit out of her depth here. Nevertheless, I'd say this is a well-written travelogue made in good faith, and sometimes that's enough. The next book was, again, in Ukrainian, The Target Ceased to Exist by Serhiy Demchuk. This is a collection of short stories that aren't really fictional, at least not wholly, about basically life during war. Some are about living under occupation or in evacuation, some about living through air raid alerts and still getting to poetic reading, and some are about, well, war. It feels like a mosaic made of small bits of human lives making up the normal reality during an objectively not normal time. But what makes it really cut to the bone is what's in between the stories. Serhiy Demchuk, who is now a serviceman, used to work in the coordination headquarters for the Prisoners of War Treatment, which is currently the government body overseeing everything related to prisoners of war, like exchanges, return of the bodies, etc. He worked in the headquarters press service and, among other things, collected the stories of former Ukrainian captives or their relatives about Russian imprisonment. Those stories were published online, but Demchuk selected some of them to print here. Some are by the service people who survived Mariupol, some were taken captive elsewhere, but all of them mention beatings, mistreatment, torture, and misinformation. It's a grim reading, but also not gratuitous, because usually survivors don't seem eager to go too deep into what they've been through. I enjoyed most of it, but didn't like or understand the play in the end, so we're not going to dwell on that.
I don't understand, and I don't think I want it explained.
In my opinion, this is one of those Ukrainian books that would be very hard to translate because you need to know the context of living in Ukraine to really get it. Anyway, many Ukrainian prisoners of war have given public accounts outside of the coordination headquarters, and some of them are in English. I'll leave some links below if you're interested. Next was another audio and another Tea Kingfisher, Wolfworm. I'm on a very prolonged and frequently interrupted Tea Kingfisher marathon, if you will. Wolfworm might just be my second favorite after Nettle and Bone, even though I gave Nettle and Bone 4 stars, but well, Writing is not only subjective, it's also inconsistent. So, Wolfworm is about a spinster illustrator, Sonia, who comes to a reclusive household in North Carolina in the end of the 19th century to help an eccentric scientist complete his book on some nasty local insects. Of course, the house has secrets. Of course, there are creepy tales about blood thieves. Of course, there is a place she should never venture in, like, obviously. I liked how this story kept me on my toes regarding where exactly it was going. There are mentions of some near-demonic, vampire-like creatures, but there is also this incredibly gross parasite. The animals are acting weird. It's a whole tangle of threats, but they do eventually come together rather neatly. Sonia's inner monologue gets exhausting because she's constantly overthinking and worrying about everything, but I suppose that was the point. I really like these side characters, especially Rose and Markercy. I kind of expected Markercy to have more page time, but hey, indigenous people aren't here to solve our problems. I dig that. Just would have loved more of her soul. The book kind of oversold its own ending though, because from the beginning the foreshadowing makes you think the ending will be something much darker than it turned out to be. Then again, Sonia really does learn some stuff she slept better without knowing and seeing, so I guess it might feel justified from her perspective. I also loved how passionate she feels about her craft, so much so that I went and bought a set of watercolors to complete my long range of hobbies I do nothing to get better at. It's a lovely summer read. The writing is Ticking Fisher's trademark mix of macabre and funny, perfect for May and June and for reading outside, but proceed with caution if you are squeamish about bugs, because this book doesn't hold back when it comes to them and it gets appropriately gross. Next audiobook that I finished was Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I kept hearing good things about Riley Sager and decided to try again, and this time with much better results. Middle of the Night is a thriller about a 40-year-old man, Ethan Marsh, who's never quite got over this unfortunate little thing that happened to him when he was 10, and his best friend Billy disappeared from a tent where they were sleeping in the backyard of Ethan's house, never to be seen again. He suffers from insomnia, his marriage has recently disintegrated, and here he is, back to his parents' house in a cul-de-sac where his friend vanished, surrounded by more or less the same people who were his neighbors as a kid. So, obviously it's time to solve the crime. This was miles better than With a Vengeance, because at least it doesn't start with a silly plan. Ethan has an understandable motivation of wanting some closure, enhanced when he starts spotting weird things in his neighborhood after moving back. I did have to suspend my disbelief at the notion that a huge property nearby was never searched when a child went missing, but okay, I guess. Still, Sager did have to be very in my face with his red herrings, and it was so obvious that it was what he was doing that it felt like watching a kid perform a magic trick. Like, sure, buddy, I'm gonna pretend to believe it was a cult, of course. I won't even be asking why no one considers checking on this one character that has a personal interest in the whole deal when something weird starts happening. That being said, it was still competently written and I assume edited, because at least everything didn't get repeated ad nauseum, at least not to a point that I would notice. Most, and an emphasis on most, of the red herrings thrown our way actually had something to do with the main plot, and the conflicts tied to them got resolved. It got incredibly sad at times, which I somehow didn't expect. The ending felt like a bit of a cop-out, but it was still a good ride, and I tend to like this little unassuming toying with the supernatural that is happening here. The next is a Ukrainian classic titled The Journey of the Learned Doctor Leonardo and His Future Lover, the Beauteous Alceste, to the Switzerland of Slobozhanshchyna. Yes, all of this was a title, by Mike Johansson. Mike Johansson, born Mikhailo Johansson, was an author from a generation known as Executed Renaissance, which sounds grim, because it was. But Mike Johansson probably didn't know how grim it was going to be, so the mood of this text is rather sarcastic and comical. There's really no point trying to describe the plot because it's rather avant-garde and postmodern, but to keep it brief, an Italian doctor, or is he? Leonardo visits the Slobozhanshchyna region in eastern Ukraine together with his companion and somewhat of a love interest Alceste. And in their travels they keep encountering local archetypical characters and experiencing weird events at the whim of their eccentric author. To give you an idea, at some point Johansson tells you that he can't tell you what happened to the characters next because they're not real. He made them up. What do you mean, what happened next? Nothing happened. It's make-believe. What is real, however, is the place, the so-called Switzerland of Slobozhanshchyna, or a part of the modern Kharkiv region in the area of the city Zmiev, cut through by the river Siversky Donets, with cliffs and steep banks, beaches and forests. I don't know if I would call it the local Switzerland per se, but even the naming feels a bit ironic. I don't think Johansson ever compares the landscape landscape to Switzerland while describing it. He uses a name that's already in use and maybe helps him to tie the place to the European context, but it doesn't sound like he's taking it seriously. The valley of the Siversky Donets isn't Switzerland, it's Ukraine, and if you had any doubts, a Spanish character temporarily morphing into a Ukrainian should persuade you. This book was written at the dawn of the Soviet occupation of Ukraine because that's what it was, when the so-called Korenizatsiya or nativization politics was still somewhat holding up. The Red Terror didn't start in full yet, which is context I think is worthwhile keeping in mind when reading this. It's not political, but I don't think it could have been published even 5 years later than it was. The final version was published in 1932. There is a certain dark irony of the novel poking fun at this archetype of a stereotypical Ukrainian folk hero only for Johansson to be executed in 1937 on wrongful accusations of being a member of a nationalist terrorist organization. The main thing to know about this book is that landscape is the main character, and if you don't know what's going on, just stick to that idea, okay? This book has recently been translated into English, and you can in fact read it, or so it seems, judging from the Amazon website. Anyway, I'll leave the link to the Harvard University Press. Just know that if it feels weird, it's most likely not the translator's fault. It's just a weird book. It's fascinating, but, weird. Also this year I finally finished Science of Fairy Tales by Edwin Sidney Hartland, and this was my turkey. Yeah, like Joey's Thanksgiving turkey. I'm old, alright? Embarrassingly, this book isn't even that big. It's less than 300 pages, including the appendix, and I started it last August. I took it with me to Chisinau thinking, well, I'll definitely finish it here with few other books to distract me, and I just bought more books there, so. In my defense, it was written in the 19th century in an appropriately old-fashioned, posh, academic English, also with occasional dry humor, and sometimes Hartland quotes people talking with the Scottish accent just to mess with me. So on top of my usual slow pace when reading nonfiction, there was that. That's not to say the book wasn't interesting though. I heard about it first because Guillermo del Toro mentioned somewhere he gave it to Taylor Swift, but now that I've read it, I gotta ask, why? It's not a book about how to write a fairy tale, just like The Hero with 1,000 Faces is not a book about how to write a space opera. Not that it stopped George Lucas, so maybe keep your eyes peeled. Taylor might be announcing a movie about the origins of the Lady Godiva myth any day now. Nevertheless, I decided to read it because I'm generally interested in folklore, although Evermore is my favorite. Okay, I'll stop, I'm sorry. Hartland sets off to dissect myths, not as literary works, but as anthropological documents of sorts, while also pointing out how different cultures have some similar plots or plot elements that give us a reason to trace them to some shared source, or at least to assume that such source existed. To my untrained eye, he makes a pretty decent argument, although his research is mostly, but not exclusively, centered around the European myths, and when he's talking about non-white people, well, he's a British man in the 19th century, so the language he uses does get pretty dismissive, with words like savages. You get the idea. He theorizes that the structure and the interpretation of a myth changes as a nation evolves, so obviously some rather conceited notions of lower and higher levels of civilization in different cultures are brought up. You can imagine which is which. Still, I don't like moralizing about people who were as much the products of their time as I am of mine, so I focus on the material presented. I was very surprised somehow to see at least one lesser-known plot that I read in a fairy tale as a kid about a guy who visited the underworld and spent a day there only to come back and realize 100 years passed in reality. There was also a rather disturbing part about the beliefs of changelings that unfortunately drove people to harm real innocent children. While after finishing this book I won't be able to chatter off out of the top of my head how a myth works and how many examples of a sleeping hero plot are there, but one of them is Alexa Dovbush, by the way. It was still an incredibly enriching read. I have like a million sticky bookmarks in my copy and will probably be returning to them, so if you like mythology and psychology, I very much recommend checking this one out. The next audiobook I finished was The Darkest Web by Christian Wright. 4.5 stars. I'm pretty sure I haven't been naming the stars for each and every one book in this video, have I? I'll put them on the screen if you're interested. So I was this close to giving up on thrillers forever. You can't see my fingers, but they're pretty close to each other. But this one looked a bit more like murder mystery, so I gave it a go and didn't regret it. I later realized that this is a second book in the series, but I didn't feel out of the loop for most of it, save for the mentions of the case in the first book, so I guess you can read this as a standalone. Alison Barton is a defense attorney who is out of the blue contacted by her first-year college roommate Jane Knudsen because Jane has just discovered her boss's dead body and she knows she'll be a prime suspect. Unfortunately, she's correct. and it's really hard to prove she's innocent considering she had a motive and is clearly keeping secrets of her own. But believe it or not, some guy being shot is by far not the darkest thing here. I highly recommend consulting with trigger warnings. Yes, they might spoil some stuff to you, but this is not a story to go in unprepared. I happened to listen to some of the hardest bits of it while being out and about, and it was a depressing experience. That being said, the mystery is layered enough that when there's a reveal, it doesn't feel cheap, even though it's literally someone saying the name. And when you look back, it's not painfully obvious, but the hints were there. Allison is an occasionally frustrating character, but she feels realistically flawed, and I loved her and Jane's POVs depicting how women can be insecure about themselves and judgy about each other for no good reason, and how that basically screws over all of us. This book teased that it actually had something to say about abuse and exploitation, a very specific and very sickening type of those, to be precise, the one involving children, about misogyny and bro culture, and then, would you believe it actually went and said it instead of going, it was all actually just a very sad coincidence. Taking out some other books on this list. I would be tempted to say that Wright gets cartoonish in the way men here talk about a beautiful woman, but we've all seen Twitter, haven't we? If anything, the book kept it tame. Minus half the point because honestly I didn't care for the romance at all, and I hate to say that, but the kid was annoying. I can't say that about fictional kids, okay? I respect real kids and I respect mothers, just so we're clear. The next one I read was another arc, Alchemists of Dawn by G.S. Valiant, and I thank G.S. Valiant and NetGalley for the opportunity to read this book. I have a detailed review on my Storygraph, but I don't expect you to go there and read it. You absolutely can though. You also can follow me on Instagram, no pressure. I'll recap it here in brief. It's set in what feels like a gaslamp fantasy Southeast Asia. I want to say like Malaysia or Singapore, but I've never been, so it's a guess. The author is Canadian with Malaysian origins. We have a world powered by magic. It works a little like electricity, but also like something akin to software, and this magic is produced from natural mind sources and manufactured by a monopoly called Viner. Roxanne Young works at Viner as a researcher, but just because it's fantasy doesn't mean you can escape obligatory workplace misogyny, so she's being constantly passed over for promotions, and then, because she can't catch a break, she witnesses a murder. Meanwhile, Roxanne's mother, Juliana, is dealing with Viner's bureaucracy as a department head and also may or may not be uncovering a conspiracy, so they kind of work in parallels on solving the same secret. I'm at the age when I can appreciate a good young adult book, but I really enjoy books with older female protagonists. Roxanne is in her early 30s and Juliana is 65, both kick-ass. Great. I appreciated the depiction of mother-daughter relationship as not idyllic, but also not downright abusive. There are problems, but there's also a lot of mutual respect and support, and this is the dynamic that I can get behind, and I don't see it very often in fiction. My main problem with this book was that it does this thing when the characters need a ridiculously long time to figure something out, even when the crumbs are all over the place. More than once here, someone happens to accidentally eavesdrop on someone else and hear something important and it's not addressed immediately. The premise makes it look like Roxanne and Juliana work together for the most part, but for a very long time Roxanne doesn't ask her mother some very obvious questions. Also, this is a debut book and I tend to be more lenient to those, but I do have a bone to pick with whoever edited the thing, because the same phrases get used paragraphs apart and the characters keep calling each other names in dialogues, which is not how people talk, not in my experience. I still like the concept of commodified magic as opposed to folk or natural magic, and there was one scene that I adored where Juliana tells off a member of the anti-Viner movement, the people who are against the monopoly, and when he tells her he wanted to more or less burn it all to the ground, she says something along the line of, dying is easy, it's leaving after society collapses that's hard. I loved the moral dilemma of working for a deeply unethical system while also trying to make it better where you can, as opposed to just raise it to the ground. I wish the book leaned into that theme more, but most of the villains were almost cartoonishly corrupt, so it's not like they could uphold the discussion. I also wished there were more visual descriptions because the world feels very vibrant and rich potentially, but mostly because in my head it was basically Arcane, the show. One of the characters is literally Jace in appearance. I just wish the author had given my imagination more to work with. Still a solid concept that needed more editing, and I hope that G.S. Valiant writes more. The next audiobook that I finished was Bad Publicity by Bianca Gillam. I'm starting to think that the the only reason why I enjoyed this book as much as I did was because earlier this year I tried to listen to an Audible included coffee shop romance, and it put my expectations for rom-coms through the floor. Now don't get me wrong, it wasn't bad per se. It follows a young publicist, Andy, who lands a job managing publicity for an author. The downside being that the author is Jack, her almost ex from college, almost because they didn't date as such. They had a very short infatuation and a swift and very brutal fallout. Now it's 5 years later and they are trying to be professional about it with predictable results. I liked this book far more before it got to what actually happened in college. Not much was happening before that, frankly. They just travel around Europe and visit bookstores, present the book, find themselves in awkward situations, your regular rom-com stuff. And I didn't mind it, it was fun. Also, Andy is grieving her father who died 5 years ago and she still hasn't unpacked that loss. But fear not, she'll remind us how much she misses him regularly. It doesn't get too bad though until our characters get together briefly. Andy immediately flips out and says she doesn't want to talk about what happened 5 years ago. Jack pouts like a tantrum-throwing child, and the book literally drags its feet through a very avoidable third act breakup. Now, I'm gonna put time codes probably because there's gonna be spoilers about what was the initial college deal, so skip there if you don't want to hear it. Done? Okay, good. So, in the University of Edinburgh, which looks so beautiful, oh my god. Okay, stay on topic. So, when Andy and Jack were studying there was a website posting so-called reviews on girls from boys who had hookups with them. Very crude, very gross, nothing new. Andy decided to uncover who was behind the website and enlists Jack to help her because he's on the swimming team and can hear the locker room talk. He gives her the information, she posts an anonymous article in the student newspaper, they have a one-night stand, and then the big bad Nepo baby student who was managing the website and can theoretically make them both lose their scholarship confronts both of them separately, forces Jack to post something very private about Andy because Jack is an idiot and couldn't make something up. He posts a real detail which is of course very invasive, and then the big bad attacks Andy and threatens her into agreeing to revoke the article, and then Andy flips out at Jack and says she doesn't want to talk to him ever again. He gets offended that she would think so badly about him even though she has every reason to, and they never speak again. And what about the website, the article, the consequences for Jack because it's eventually revealed he got back at the big bad bully, but apparently he still somehow got his degree? We'll never find out. This plotline did its job of setting up the conflict. The book was never interested in actually dealing with the themes of campus sexism and corruption, even though that story is much more interesting. It gives us one very dark, very tense scene that just goes on and on just to set up the miscommunication and nothing else. But because of this entire backstory, by the end of the book, Jack feels like such a man-child. A freshly traumatized girl yells at you and doesn't want to hear you out. Sure, play the victim for the next 5 years. Why not? I mean, you could write her an email and then if she doesn't read it, then yeah, you did what you could. But why would you bother? It's so much more fun when everyone is upset and not talking. Okay, I think we can end the spoilers here. The happy ending isn't a spoiler, it's a genre requirement. Because there is a happy ending, of course, but even when everything is cleared out, Andy still finds a way to not get with her crush and waste some more time on her self-discovery, even though she could probably do that while dating the guy she clearly wants to date. So long story short, the book starts like a rom-com, turns into some weird exploitative thriller for a couple pages, and then ends with a finale that could have happened like 100 pages ago if these young adults didn't behave like children. But hey, if you like bookstores, this book has some. And the last book I finished in June was The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman, and I hope I pronounce his name right because I love this one. 4.5, close to 5 stars. Yeah, I ended the first half of 2026 with a bang. You know what, looking back, it could be a 5 because not only did I thoroughly enjoy it while reading it, it also has stayed with me since. The premise feels very typical for dark fantasy. There's a thief, he has debts, he needs to go on a quest to get his creditor, aka his alma mater, the Guild of Thieves, off his back. Add to that the world that's barely recovering from a devastating war of goblins against humans, some complicated geopolitics, and the fact that Kinch's partner on a quest is a female war veteran, while Kinch himself, speaking in modern terms, dodges the draft. Also, the war veteran is an incredibly tough woman with a giant fighter crow that can emerge from a tattoo on her body. How cool is that? The thing about this book is it's narrated as if Kinch himself is telling it to you many years later, so you can hear what kind of a person he is. There's a Jake Peralta-like, if I laugh at my experience, it doesn't count as trauma energy, and you can tell he doesn't fully unpack how he feels about many things, including the shame of dodging the draft for a defensive war. So instead of said unpacking, we get a road trip full of monsters, fights, duels, sea storms, secret plots about lost princesses with a occasional moments where Kinch just kinda observes the world around him rather than confront how he feels. There was a scene of public hanging that I started reading expecting that it would be somehow important for the plot. It wasn't. He just shares a moment of mutual understanding with someone being hanged. And there's a lot of human emotion in that exchange that's hard to categorize, and the book isn't really trying to. I feel like dark fantasy is sometimes trying to go over the top, being cynical, no one cares about anything, every man for himself, empathy is cringe, that kind of thing. And I really like that the tone here is dark and ironic, while it's clear that Kinch very much cares, even if he doesn't always tell us about it. This spills over into his relationship with his companion and with his crush, and I actually didn't even know how much I wanted something like this before I got it. Here we come to why this book isn't full 5 stars for me. Again, potential mild spoilers, consult the timecode. Done? Good. So there is a scene closer to the end of the book that might make, and has made as far as I can tell, people judge this book for dismissing the trauma of male SA survivors. And again, the way it's narrated, you can imagine someone like Kinch not being willing to spill his guts about how much this affected him. It's not descriptive, it's pretty heavy, it's not portrayed as a good thing, even though it is addressed in a rather neutral way. This made sense to me, but what I couldn't excuse, the same character that may or may not have assaulted Kinch leads a gang that has multiple children in its numbers, and I'm pretty sure they are in the room when the guy, who's an adult, tells Kinch, "Everyone here that you can see has been my lover." First of all, that's not what it's called, my guy, and second, was it necessary? No, it wasn't. It was very much unnecessary, in fact, and it was never addressed again. So yeah, I guess that's where I draw the line. Otherwise, it's a very engaging, occasionally very romantic and thoughtful story with a great protagonist. You can hear me talking about him like I know him, like he's a real person, which is a sign of a well-written character. There is a sequel coming out this year, and I will be very eager to read it. There's also a prequel that I want to read, even though I suspect it will wreck me. So these are the books that I read in the first 6 months of 2026. Now, let's go over the ones that I didn't finish, because I feel like they deserve a mention. At least 2 of the 3 I'm due, because the first is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Yep. Hear me out. It's a soft DNF. I'd want to proceed with it one day, but it's never a good sign when the thought of picking up a book fills you with dread. I started it in December, then I had to travel for a couple months, didn't take it with me because it's a big book, and then I come back and I look at that poor copy lying there and I go, oh, you're still here. Since I stopped at about 70% in, I think I can offer a more or less informed opinion on this book, even though I can't rate it. And the opinion is it really, really insists upon itself. R.F. Kuang is clearly a very educated author who's done a ton of research. The problem is she doesn't trust your ability to pick up what she's putting down, and she can't seem to leave out anything that she gathered for this book. It's exhausting to listen to someone tell you over and over that colonialism and racism is bad when you already know that.
I was agreeing with you! I'm sorry, I'm just so excited about all this!
I really wish the book focused on this incredibly interesting concept of translation magic and allowed us to make our own conclusions. In fact, this may sound weird, but I almost had a feeling like Babel would have worked better as a series, maybe a duology with one installment, for example, focusing more but not exclusively on silverwork, the academia, and the main character's relationship, and the other on politics and the revolution. Because as it is, this book tries to do a lot of things at the same time. The characters feel like archetypes and mouthpieces for whatever the author wants you to understand, and as a result, it's paradoxically both very rushed and drawn out. I don't know how else to explain this. This is a very praised book, and I don't think it's undeserved. It's well written, occasionally very profound. I had a ton of bookmarks in it, and I don't regret it. It also achieves a rare feat of having a Muslim character who feels like a real person. It just wasn't a very good reading experience for me personally. I hope I explained myself clear. Also, as you noticed, I'm not recapping what it is about, because at this point, if you don't know, I don't know how to help you. My next DNF was Nostalgia by Mircea Cărtărescu. I bought this book in Chișinău because I wanted to learn more about authors who write in Romanian. I have 2 books in Romanian, but it doesn't look like I'm mastering the language anytime soon, so I decided to try translation. Cărtărescu is a Romanian author, not Moldovan, just so we're clear. This book is structured as a novel. It has prologue, chapters, and epilogue, but until very close to the point I decided to put it down, which was a bit past 50%, there was no tangible connection between the chapters. So I was convinced this is actually a short stories collection in disguise. I did like the prologue titled The Roulette Player, about, well, Russian roulette and an entire underground movement around it. It's rather postmodern, a little absurd, but also a bit melancholic and tense in tone, and I was very interested in what was to come next. Well, the next one is called Mentardi. It's about a weird boy getting a gang of kids from his apartment building under his spell, and it didn't click with me quite as much, but I still found it interesting enough to keep going. The Twins was a chore to get through, and I only conducted this chore because it felt like watching a fascinating fever dream. I wasn't sure what I was reading, but at some point seeing it through became a matter of honor, if you will. The Twins can either be about a trans woman talking about her transition in the most psychedelic way possible, or about a deeply unsettled young man with dissociative identity disorder or something like that. I'm not sure which one was intended here, honestly. By the fourth story, I realized this just wasn't working, and I would have to find some other way into my litfic era. This book would be a nightmare for the dialogue-only book talkers because there's very little dialogue in it. It's just huge paragraphs of text, and it is pretty good prose as far as I can tell. It's psychological, precise, deep, but by the end I felt like it was trying too much. All the stories are framed as retelling of the past one way or another, and it was interesting to watch how memories can contort and morph into something phantasmagoric and occasionally nightmarish. But at some point I was like, you know what, I'm good. This has been nice, but I don't want another second of it. Thank you very much. I usually finish about 2 to 5 books a month. I didn't finish a single one in April, and I'm pretty sure that's because I was trying too hard to drag myself through Babel and nostalgia, and it just killed my sparkle. These aren't even bad books. You can finish a bad book out of spite just to then hate on it with clear conscience. This was just me wasting my time trying to make myself enjoy something I didn't. I'm very bad at DNFing, but this experience really made me appreciate the option of just cutting my losses and putting the book down. That's not to say that I don't recommend nostalgia. If you like thick, serious psychological writing and weird plots where not too much happens, definitely give this a go. It commits to whatever it's trying to do. I'm not sure what it was trying to do, but it did commit. And my third DNF was Audible included, which I'm not proud of still being subscribed to Audible, but thank God I didn't waste any extra money on it. It was Love at First Latte by Sarah Saville. Yes, it's called Love at First Latte. Please don't judge me. I just wanted a cutesy coffee shop romance, okay? In this one, a famous actress, Natalie, who's down on her luck, and by down on her luck, I mean she didn't get the role she wanted. It's not like she's going broke or something. Retreats from Hollywood to Edinburgh, where she gets a job in a struggling coffee shop owned by Nick, who is narrated with a rich Scottish accent. I swear this accent kept me in this book far longer than I would have stayed otherwise. This felt as if Emily Henry lost all her introspection and humor while retaining all the overly dramatic reactions and millennial cringe. I have little patience for insta-lust in the best of days, and these two were like exceptionally annoying. I could already tell what the third act conflict would be because Natalie, surprisingly for a famous actress, cannot use her words, and these two apparently cannot hold themselves together around each other, which was giving me severe secondhand embarrassment. I can read about young people being desperately in love with some fondness because adorable stupid kids, but these people are in their 30s. At some point I remembered I'm not into self-harm and peaced out. By the way, I paused my Audible membership, don't worry, and I'm looking into other options. You hear that, Jeff? As soon as I decide between Libro.fm and Everend, I'm joining Mackenzie, the club of women who left you behind. But yeah, that was my half-year wrap-up. Wrap-up is a weird word, no? If you're somehow still here, tell me what was your favorite read in the first half of the year, or least favorite, or I don't know, the middest favorite. Anyway, thanks for listening, you enjoy your reading, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.